In a bold diplomatic appeal, civil rights group Afriforum has called on G20 countries to press South Africa on two deeply contentious issues: property rights and the violent attacks on farmers. Their plea arrives just as Johannesburg prepares to host this year's G20 summit. A moment, Afriforum argues, when global powers can tip the balance on critical domestic policy. Afriforum's CEO, Callie Creel, said the group has formally written to G20 embassies in South Africa, urging them to use both the summit and ongoing diplomatic engagements to demand that Pretoria respect private property and take decisive action to address farm murders. According to Creel, these concerns are not theoretical. They pose real risks to investment, social cohesion, and international trust. In Creel's framing, uncertainty around property rights is not just an academic matter. He warns that continued erosion of those rights could spook investors and undermine South Africa's economic stability. Pointing to the fates of other nations where expropriation has gone unchecked, he named Zimbabwe and Venezuela as cautionary tales, places where rampant disregard for property ownership fostered economic collapse, hyperinflation, and widespread poverty. More than that, Afriforum argues that farm murders demand urgent recognition and action. The group is calling on the government to acknowledge what it calls excessive torture and violence accompanying some of these killings. It insists the crime should be formally declared a priority, and that the police should work hand in glove with lawful farm and neighborhood watch organizations. For Afriforum, this is not a fringe demand. It is a moral imperative rooted in protecting vulnerable rural communities. One of their more politically loaded calls is for President Cyril Ramaphosa to publicly condemn the inflammatory "Kill the Boer" chant. Afriforum regards the chant not only as incitement, but as a symbol of ethnic aggression that must be rejected without reservation. In their view, a failure to do so undermines justice and signals tacit acceptance of violence. On the matter of land reform, Afriforum is equally sharp. They are urging the government to amend its Expropriation Act, specifically to remove provisions that allow expropriation without compensation, Section 12(3), and permit expropriation before final court rulings, Section 19(2). For the group, these sections represent a grave threat to the principle of private property, a right they believe must remain inviolable, even in the service of reform. Afriforum has framed its proposal not as a rejection of land reform, but as a call for responsible reform, rooted in rule of law and protection of individual rights. They claim their engagement is born of loyalty to South Africa and all its people. To them, the safeguarding of private property is not a narrow interest, but a foundation for shared prosperity, stability, and human dignity. It is not just policy that Afriforum is pushing. They are also preparing to release a new report on minority rights in South Africa. Creel says the document will highlight alleged violations of human rights, especially of property-owning minorities, and provides what he describes as practical, workable solutions to stem the tide of violence and expropriation. Afriforum insists its campaign is grounded in diplomacy and dialogue. Their outreach to the G20 is not framed as a threat, but as a constructive intervention. Creel argues that G20 countries have a stake in what happens in South Africa. Instability and attacks on property rights could scare off foreign capital, damaging not just local markets, but global sentiment as well. Some critics, however, warn that Afriforum's appeal is fraught with political risk. To them, the group is leveraging an international platform to amplify a narrative about rural crime and land policy that is deeply contested. They worry that such appeals could exacerbate racial tensions, polarize domestic debates, and undermine national sovereignty, all in the name of securing foreign pressure. Others within civil society question the framing. Is Afriforum's campaign truly about protecting victims, or about defending privilege? They argue that the issue is more complex than Afriforum's lens suggests, that violence on farms cannot be divorced from broader structural inequalities and historical injustices. Still, Afriforum is pushing ahead. Creel's letter to the G20 embassies risks reopening old wounds, and it could shape the summit's agenda in surprising ways. By asking powerful nations to weigh in, the group is forcing a conversation about property, violence, and the future of reform. For many, Afriforum's appeal is a test of global influence. Will the G20 respond? Will international pressure alter South African policy? And, perhaps more importantly, will this diplomatic gambit help protect the people they argue are most at risk, or will it deepen divides? Whatever happens, Afriforum is making its move on a world stage. Their intervention reminds the country and its leaders that property and safety are not merely domestic issues. They are part of a global contract, one in which rights, investments, and human lives intersect.